And welcome to the MMA Outsider podcast, where I don't even remember what episode we're on anymore because we've had too many technical difficulties. But since you last heard from us, George Masvidal set himself up as probably the next Strikeforce lightweight contender, and Nate Marquardt found a way to completely screw up and get himself fired from the UFC. And joining me is my host, who will be back in charge of the initial intro proceedings once he gets his computer fixed, Richard Mann. Richard, how you doing?
I could be doing better. I've had computer issues. I have like 6 or 7, and they're all out of commission. So life's hard. Life's real hard.
Yeah, and how old's your laptop? Like 8 years old?
Well, I mean, it really depends on which one you're talking about. I think the newest one is only like 3 years, but the oldest one is 8 years. I got it right before I went to college. So yeah.
Well, I got a rule of thumb: if your computer is old enough to register for elementary school, you got to get rid of it.
Or think about private school.
Yeah. So, as I'm sure you saw, like I did, UFC Live 4 on Versus. It was supposed to be titled, I thought, My Court versus Story, and then something funny happened on the way to the show. And you wrote extensively about it, so I'm going to let you kick it off because, you obviously have an interesting view on things about the whole Nate Marquardt situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to have a strong opinion on whether, he should be fired or whether he shouldn't. However, it's just the fact that something happens, he gets in trouble, and then he's fired. And he's fired in a very public and a very disgraceful way, and there's no recourse, there's no way to appeal, and it's basically just one man insulting another guy and, running his name through the mud because he did something he didn't like. And it just makes the UFC look very bush league, and it makes them look very amateur because, it just doesn't happen in other sports. And now we find out that the reason why he got the boot is because he was trying to do testosterone replacement therapy and his levels came in high. It's like, a couple weeks ago, Dana White talked about how Chael Sonnen's being treated unfairly when he actually lied to the government and broke the law, where it's like Marquardt applied for it properly and just came in with heavy levels, and he'll never fight in the UFC again. It's just, it's like a whole sport should not be run on the whims of someone who has shown themselves to at least have anger management issues and possibly be crazy.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw your article, I was getting ready to really strongly disagree with you because I thought you were doing the good old tried and true journalism tactic of something controversial happened, so I'm going to take this crazy stance and talk about how the problem is we have no unions and Nate Marquardt is being victimized here, and so. But then I read over it, and you just made your point is that I don't think anyone. Well, I mean, actually, I have seen some people that do. I'm not one of them. Some people feel sorry for Nate Marquardt, and, admittedly, if the athletic commissions could get together and join pretty much every other pro sport and not allow some kind of testosterone replacement therapy exemption, that would probably make things a lot easier because, it shouldn't be there. I don't know why any elite level athlete would need that. It sounds suspicious because, as we can all guess, if you need it, then it hints that maybe you were using steroids before, and Marquardt had a positive test before, and you tried to dispute that. But you brought up a good point about Chael Sonnen. I'm not a huge fan of him at all. So he's committed a felony. He basically had the exact same thing happen to him that happened to Nate Marquardt. Only he handled it a lot worse. He lied. He just kept making excuses over and over again. Whereas while I don't support what Marquardt did. I mean, he tried to do it by the book. He fucked up, but there really isn't a consistency here, and we see that sometimes with the guys who get cut, like Gerald Harris, because he has one boring fight, and other guys, like we can talk about later, who, they lose fight after fight, and for some reason they're kept on board, and it really does seem kind of arbitrary. And it's Dana White's league; he can run it how he wants to, but it does raise it does kind of raise the issue that we need to think about some kind of way to have a standardized procedure for how we handle these types of things afterwards.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a very good point, but it is Dana's league. And a lot of people have made the argument that Dana White, by cutting Marquardt, has come out and he's put his foot down that he is not going to stand for PEDs. And he is against them, and if you use them, you're going to get kicked out of the UFC. It's not really what's the case. They could charge $1 extra pay-per-view and have the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency come in and do it, and follow their cards, and have out-of-competition testing. And that would eliminate this problem entirely.
Right.
And if he's really serious about it, he can do that. And it's like, we don't want to do it because that's what the commission does. When they go to Britain, they do all the testing themselves. There's no commission there. They do it all themselves.
Yeah.
And it's like, if he really, I think that part of the reason why it's so offensive is that he's using this. I think part of it is he was upset that Marquardt ruined the main event when Marquardt's name was in the title.
No doubt.
And
Yeah.
I think the other part is he's using it as an opportunity to show that he's tough on PEDs. And he's not tough on PEDs because he has the ability to be tough, and he's not taking advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, you are right that I don't think the UFC should take over the testing themselves necessarily. Something I've discussed is that there'd be, clearly a conflict of interest issue there because other sports leagues, they don't pay the players directly. Obviously, that happens to the teams and the owners. But, certainly if they could contract through some group like the, World Anti-Doping Agency or something like that, that would be ideal. And, I think what we need to discuss more is, okay, it's the athletic commission's decision for some reason, I don't know why, to say that you're allowed to use TRT as long as your levels don't exceed the amount they're supposed to, but why would the UFC be okay with that type of therapy going on when, you've talked about comparing the UFC to other sports and trying to, seem professional and well run. Why would they allow that when I think pretty much no other sports league that I know of would? Because, like I said, the two problems that UFC has trying to do that is they don't test year round, so you can't test year round to see if a guy's levels are shooting through the roof and then he's cycling off and using TRT to kind of keep his levels normal or whatever the reason might be. So it just seems fishy to me that they would, if they knew about it, and again, I have to, based on the Sarno situation, I have to assume they have some inkling of an understanding. Why would the UFC just say, you know what, even though the athletic commission say it's okay, you can't do this?
Yeah, I think the commissions also should not get off with this scot-free. You've seen Keith Kaiser come out now, and he's throwing around a lot of harsh words, a lot of, tough talk. And when they get papers from a doctor about testosterone replacement therapy, the guy who testified at Sonnen's hearing was a joke. I mean, I'm sure he's a licensed, doctor and everything, but it's like, it doesn't stop him from being a joke. And I think when you listen, Sherdog and Josh Rose both did great interviews with Travis Tygart, the head of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, and he talked about how they had a guy who was a judo competitor, and he applied for testosterone replacement therapy exemption, and they looked into it, and they found out that, yes, he had doctor's note for it, and yes, the doctor approved it, but his symptoms could have been treated several other ways. And they ended up banning him, and they ended up suspending him. And it's like, that is the kind of oversight that these taxpayer-paid operations should be working with. Instead of just, fill out this form, and as long as you don't come in above this level, you're all good. Right.
Yeah, and I guess we need to wrap this up because I'm sure everyone's sick of it by now, but I'll just say watch the movie Bigger, Stronger, Faster. It's awesome, and it really... The issue of steroids and performance enhancers, it's really complicated. I think sometimes they get demonized, but other times we need to recognize that doctors don't know always what the hell they're doing, and you can find one that will prescribe you HGH or whatever the hell it is for absolutely no reason. So anyway, moving on to UFC 132, pretty good card coming up. Dominic Cruz against Uriah Faber in a rematch, even though Cruz is the guy with the belt since he moved down to bantamweight, and Faber is trying to beat him for a second time in a different weight class. It's a pretty good card overall. One thing I wanted to talk to you about first, though, at first I was going to rail and complain about how Rafael Dos Anjos against George Sotiropoulos is on the Spike TV card getting that kind of recognition because, that fight, I don't care. And then you look at a fight like Brian Bowles, a former champion, against Takeya Mizugaki, a former title challenger. That fight interests me a lot more. Then I realized that, wait, that fight, just like every other prelim card that's not televised these days, is on Facebook. So, first off, do you think now, with all the Facebook streaming, does it really even matter if you're on the main card or the Facebook card as far as just having the exposure?
I think in order to have some sort of cachet with everyday fans, you still have to be on television. I think that Facebook is great. The UFC hasn't released numbers on how many people watch on Facebook or YouTube. But for example, this weekend I'm going over to a friend of a friend's house who's having a UFC party, and we're going to watch the card there. And I know that they're not going to have the Facebook hooked up ahead of time. So, I still think that it's reaching a hardcore audience, and the hardcore audience are the people who care. So in that sense, it works perfectly. But I feel like, in order to get the sponsor money and in order to increase your Q factor, it still helps to be on the televised portion of the card.
there's that end of it too. But let's just jump into the main card, I guess. As far as Dennis Seaver and Matt Wyman, an interesting fight. Seaver beat a guy, George Soteropoulos, that everyone was saying might get a title shot if he got that one win. I think maybe that might have been a bit premature, but turns out Seaver really made him look bad, and now he's fighting Matt Wyman. I think Seaver is the better guy on the feet. But Wyman's a guy who I think really improved since the Ultimate Fighter show. Last time out against Cole Miller, he looked great. This is a very different style matchup, so I'm really not sure who to pick on this one. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't really thought about this fight very much. My first inclination, and I think I'm going to stick with it, is to go with Wyman because he has a more well-rounded game, and he's just a game fighter, and he'll be able to take it to the ground, mix it up in the clinch. Seaver, as everyone knows, is a strong striker. He throws that spinning back kick with force. He really just lucked into a situation where he had a really good game plan against Soteropoulos. Because Soteropoulos is not a strong wrestler, and he hadn't really been in a situation where he needed his wrestling the way he did in the Seaver fight. And I think Seaver did a great job of taking advantage of that, but I don't think one good win really ups your rating as a fighter. So I think that, this is still Wyman's pick to win. It is still a close fight, and Seaver could work him over on the feet, but I would have to favor Wyman if I had to make a pick, which I do, because we're picking fights.
Yeah, and I agree. I am going to give a slight edge to Wyman. There's a couple things that stick out. First of all, Seaver did lose to Ross Pearson, and I think that's a big black mark on anyone's record if you want to be a top lightweight. And you mentioned Soteropoulos not having strong wrestling. I think that's kind of an insult to guys who wrestle at all because his takedowns, they looked horrible. And I know Wyman's not like a world-class wrestler or anything like that, but if he does want to get the fight to the ground, I have no doubt he'll look a lot better setting it up and trying to work his takedown attempts than what Soteropoulos did. Because, I mean, for me,
chances are he will not bend over at the waist and just run it as a bonus.
Run it and reach. It was almost Hoist Gracie-esque. But yeah, that was a pretty disappointing fight, at least for Soteropoulos' point of view. The next fight is also kind of intriguing in a different way. Dong Hyun Kim. The guy gets results, no doubt, but he bores the shit out of me. And he's fighting Carlos Condit, who's really the exact opposite. He doesn't always come out on top. He's an exciting fighter, goes for a lot of finishes, but wrestling is kind of his one weakness, and I could see a judo player like Kim taking him down, grinding him out, and making it ugly, kind of like the Nate Diaz fight. I'm not entirely sure it'll work out that way, but I'll put you on the spot first.
Yeah, I mean, when the fight was first made, I thought, this is going to be a good win for Condit. It's going to put him in title contention. And when I really started thinking about the fight, I mean, Dong Hyun Kim has the game plan where if he's going to be able to get out and get takedowns, he's going to win. Mm-hmm. And like you said, Condit, very strong grappler, very strong striker, just not a very good wrestler. And he spends a lot of time on his back. And a lot of fights, he ends up on his back. He's able to use his jiu-jitsu. He actually has very good sweeps. Mm-hmm. But because we talked about, Kim comes from judo, he's a good grappler himself, he's not just a straight wrestler, so I don't see him being completely lost against Condit on the ground. So I expect him to get on top, use the cage for takedowns. Condit does have KO power, and he has the advantage on the feet, but I think this is going to be very similar to the Nate Diaz fight for Dong Hyun Kim.
Yeah, I almost agree with you. The one thing I do hesitate on, though, is, first of all, while Condit's not a good wrestler, the Diaz brothers, they flat out don't wrestle at all, so I guess we shouldn't have been too surprised that Nate Diaz got taken down at will. And Condit also, I think what I think might give him a bit of an edge this time around, at least like versus, say, the Martin Kampmann fight, where it was, I think, in the clinch, getting taken down from there with trips and sweeps. That was really what hurt him in that fight. I don't think we'll see the same thing happen necessarily. For one thing, being in Greg Jackson's camp, I think he'll have a much better game plan for this fight. And also, I think back to Kim's early fight in the UFC against Matt Brown, who we were talking about earlier before the show started. And, Matt Brown's an okay fighter, but he's not a world beater. And Kim, I remember, I thought Matt Brown won that fight. Kim did not have an easy time taking him down, and Brown was really prepared for the clinch and, getting off the fence and trying to defend from there. So it'd be easy to see Kim making it a really boring fight and getting him down and just, having the crowd booing by the time the fight's over and getting a straight 30-27. But I'll go with the slight, I don't want to call it an upset because it probably isn't, but I might go out on a limb and take Condit and think that he'll show a little more wrestling than he has in his previous fights, and I think he'll be a little bit smarter in how he fights this time.